All right, this is Arvid and Tyler Catch Up, and today we have a special guest on the show, Michelle Hansen, the co-founder of Geocodio, a SaaS business that provides hassle-free geocoding. She's also the author of a very practical book called Deploy Empathy, of which I own 2 copies, one of which is signed. So, I care about that book. And now she's an entrepreneurial activist as well. And we'll all catch up with each other. So let's get started. Tyler, what have you been up to this week?
This week has been really interesting. We've been doing a lot of work on leveraging sort of automation and AI internally at the fund. So we've been kind of just going nuts on a lot of little things where we've got little bots going around and summarizing things out of our CRM and turning it into a feed for us, and quick commands that we can call right out of our Slack to go and send little GPT-powered bots to go and do tasks for us. And it's been a really fun sort of deep dive. We are actually going to be spinning out a couple of these as really micro SaaSes sometime in the next couple of weeks. They're going to be more experiments than full-fledged products, but that's what we've been working on a bit this week.
So cool. Yeah, I've been having a lot of conversations on Twitter, right? as that is my job apparently, about AI and the impact that AI has on bootstrap businesses, SaaS businesses. I wish we all would have time to experiment with AI, but there are more pressing problems, and we'll get to that in a minute. One thing that I've been doing this week is preparing my little, it's not a talk really, but it's a roundtable discussion that I'm going to be facilitating at this year's MicroConf US in Denver in a couple of weeks from now, which is kind of crazy thinking about that. That stuff just sneaks up on you. I'll be like hosting a little roundtable about the challenges of entrepreneurship, SaaS and bootstrapped entrepreneurship in particular, because I guess I've been talking a lot about mental health issues and just like dealing with things. And today, again, we're going to be discussing one of these super impactful, super stressful, anxiety-inducing things that you just have to deal with and try to stay calm through. So I want to encourage people to have a little conversation about this. Not a little, an actual conversation, honest, eager, and peer-based conversation. That's what I'm going to be doing. And I obviously have to prepare for this, right? Set people up to have as productive a discussion as possible. So I've been working on this. And then obviously the AI topic is still going on with all the new things. And we can talk about that later too. But I do want to pass this conversation to Michelle now, because she probably had an amazing week as well. Michelle, what have you been doing for the last couple days?
Honestly, I have been having a lot of phone calls. So many calls, which, as a founder of a calm company, most of us probably don't say, "What did you do yesterday?" "Oh, I spent 4 hours on calls talking about taxes." But that's what I've been working on, because we just went through sales tax compliance last year and are still kind of working out a last few things with that. We are a US company, but we live in Denmark, and Denmark doesn't have the concept of LLCs. And so now we're in the middle of a gigantic international tax mess. And then the U.S. Congress, they changed the part of the tax code that deals with software development, which is giving everyone massive increases in their tax bills. And so I don't even think I can count the number of accountants that I'm talking to lately. Like, I need to hire an accountant to count all of my accountants. And that's, honestly, that's the kind of thing we don't really talk about, but that's, when you have a business that's kind of post product market fit, right? Like, and I don't know where this inflection point is. For me, it felt like things got way more on the operations side in a way that I hadn't really heard people talk about. Like when we got like over the 2 million ARR mark. But yeah, honestly, I'm kind of jealous of your week, Tyler. Like, playing with ChatGPT, and I saw some of the bots in the Calm Slack, and how there was somebody like trying to get it to write a press release about like an oil spill or something, but like put in like puns about it, and it was so funny. It was it was so funny.
I wish that was my entire week, but yeah. Oh, well, I don't envy you, but in part, one of the reasons we did want to have you on to talk about a couple of things. We want to talk about, a couple of the normal topics that we typically cover here, but we were chatting with you about this issue of Section 174 in the tax code, and we thought, the audience of folks that listen to this are probably going to be particularly impacted and should be moved to act. So we wanted to just dive right into that, if that makes sense. Arvid, do you think? Just like go straight forward.
I want to dive into taxes. I love taxes, man. This is my topic. So
yeah. So just to set a little bit of context, what we're going to do is we're going to get a deep dive on what's going. I think we're going to get a primer on what's going on. Maybe not the full deep dive. That one can be saved for the accountants. We're going to get a status update on what's going on with the tax code, how it's going to affect founders of software companies in particular, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do about it. And then I want to shift the topic as well to kind of the mental game aspect of dealing with stuff like this, especially as it seems to be, every month there's a new thing. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about that. But starting with just what is it? What's going on with Section 174, Michelle?
Yes. And so before I launch into that, the disclaimer that the experts I have been talking to have told me to say every time I talk about this is that I am not a tax accountant, and to get advice about your specific situation, talk to a tax accountant.
Yeah.
Okay. So Section 174 is the part of the tax code that deals with what is called research and experimental activities. And this includes software development and has for over 60 years. And the reason why we're talking about it is that for all that time, companies have had the option to either expense those R&E expenses, or they could amortize them. And now I should note that this is different than the R&D tax credit. This likely applies to you even if you don't take the R&D tax credit, even if you don't think you're doing R&E or R&D, because while we are still waiting for the IRS to define what software development is, because they have never had to do that before, even though it is in the tax code, the way big companies and their very well-paid accountants are interpreting this is that this is not only new product development and all of the costs that go into that, servers, salaries, everything, market research, also new feature development on existing products. And so when people think about R&D, they tend to think, oh, that's when you're doing something that's very, very experimental. Maybe you're building a new product and you're also completely building your own new framework way of doing that. And then, okay, maybe in that case, I'll apply for this R&D tax credit. This is different than that. This applies to things you are already doing and have already done, because this took effect starting January 1st, 2022. And the reason why you're just hearing about it now is that when Congress made this change in 2017, they actually intended to revert the change before it took effect for 2022. And so at the end of last year, there was a lot of conversation in Congress about repealing this and reverting Section 174 to give us the option to expense. And that kind of fell through at the last minute. And so now we're in a situation where companies who, let's say they spent $100,000 to pay a developer to build a new product last year, plus let's say another $5,000 in other expenses like servers and other licenses maybe that went into that, right? So of that $105,000, normally they would just take that all off the top of their taxable income. Instead, that has to be amortized, which means it has to be spread out over many years. And for the first year, you can only take 10% of that. And the other part of that is now profit, apparently, right? But it's not real profit because you've already spent that money. And so it's phantom profit. And we're small companies. We're not really following tax policy, right? And so all of us are finding out about this now, and like there are founders who are getting tax bills that are 466% higher than they anticipated, and are freezing hiring, laying people off, taking out loans. It's very serious, and it's just wild that Congress never intended for this to go into effect. and they have been intending to repeal it, but just haven't gotten around to it.
Yeah, got it. So just to kind of maybe play back some of the highlights here, this tax code change that is effective as of actually last year, right? So it's for this year's taxes. It affects most of what we would consider software development, right? So the salaries of software developers, the inputs, right? AWS bills. Basically, if you run a SaaS business, a lot of your costs, maybe excluding like customer support or design, but anybody doing, software development, a big chunk of that, we don't know exactly how much, but a large portion of that is going to be affected. And instead of being able to just write it off on your taxes in the normal way that you would do with all of your salaries, basically, right? I mean, most people's taxes, everybody gets paid and that gets deducted from profit, and profit's just above that. Specifically, your software development stuff is actually going to have to be spread out over somewhere between, it's 5 years or 15 years, depending on.
Yeah, so it's 5 years for U.S. expenses and 15 for international.
Right. So the point being,
do
it gets
indie
spread
businesses
out way
even
longer.
exist? That's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Did we even have a word for indie businesses 15 years ago? Like indie SaaS businesses? That might be a rather new thing comparatively, right?
I mean, and this is the problem, right? Is that even if you can get these expenses spread out over 5 years, is the business going to make it that long? And especially that first year is tough, right? Because if we have to split out new features and new products from maintenance work, so like bug fixes, for example, do we all have to be time tracking all the time? Right? Like, I used the staging server for 15 minutes to test this new feature, but then I used it for 15 minutes to work on this bug fix.
Yeah.
We haven't been time tracking that, right?
Yeah.
Like it's an administrative headache too.
Yeah. Just to, again, put a little bit of context on the impact here, is it fair to say, I mean, again, we're not accountants, but I think you can just sort of squint your eyes and look at the effect of this. It is a sort of, there's a sort of, inverted curve here of how the effect is going to happen, where the first year is going to absolutely suck, but eventually they kind of start to pile on top of each other. So if you can sort of make it to the other side, you won't have such a dramatic year over year impact, because you'll have previous years' costs starting like 4 years from now. You're not going to be in such bad of shape, assuming you can make it there, of course. But it's not like forever and all time, every single tax year is going to go up by 500%. It's just this really acute thing right now, like year 1, year 2, that could sink businesses, right? And it also just makes the businesses less profitable over time as well. Is that the right way to think about how the basic math kind of works with this?
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. And I think it will also change how people run their businesses. And, there are people who run pretty lean operations, and they're basically taking out all the money at the end of the month. You can't do that anymore.
Right.
And so it's if you make it through the first 2 years of this, then, we'll hopefully have figured out a way to live with this by that point. But considering that Congress never intended for this to go into effect, and they are still intending to repeal it, they just haven't gotten around to it. I see no reason for us to wait for thousands and thousands of small businesses to go out of business and thousands more to never even come into existence.
Gotcha. And so we've got 2 things that are pending that, we're sort of waiting for, more information that could dramatically change this. Presumably, it can only get better from where it is right now. The first one would be clarification on what is software development, right? You're saying that the IRS has not really clarified what that is. It's, there's, I guess, some chance that they could provide a narrower definition that wouldn't have so much of these costs be affected. Like, correct me if that's wrong. And then the second piece being pending legislation that would just, I'm guessing, what's on the table. I mean, I think you've looked at some of the prepared documents. It's just all this goes away, or is there a kind of new status quo that's being proposed in these legislations? Is it like switch off, go right back to 100% deduction, or is some other squishier middle ground being proposed?
Right. So the first one, we are waiting for final IRS guidance because everyone in Washington expected this to be reverted before it took effect. The IRS didn't issue the full guidance. And that's going back years, like from the time that they made this change in 2017, it was expected to be reverted. And big companies have been talking to Congress since 2019, sending them letters being like, hey, remember that thing that you intended to revert before it goes into effect? Let's not forget that. And they still haven't done it. So yes, we are still waiting for full guidance from the IRS. We only have partial guidance at this point. And then the other part is there has already been legislation introduced in the Senate. There are 21 co-sponsors and counting. That number's going up. I just checked it again today and it was up. The problem is that tax bills never get voted on their own, standalone. And from what I've been reading and talking to people, the soonest opportunity, barring Congress understanding how urgent of a crisis this is for small businesses, would be at the end of September. And there are 3 bills that are an option at the end of September to put this in, or it gets pushed to the end of the year again. Now, the problem with this is, first of all, people are having trouble paying their tax bills right now. So even waiting until September, and and these bills would make it retroactive to 2022, so you would get a refund. Right. But most small businesses are not in the position to float the IRS a couple $100,000 or more for 6 to 9 months while Congress gets this tangled up in other issues, which is what happened in December. So we are sending a coalition letter to Congress, which is a very effective tool. A group of small biotech companies sent one to Congress recently, and then a senator mentioned it in a hearing last week. So these are very effective. Sending a letter to Congress telling them that this is a problem for small software businesses, and that this is an urgent crisis that needs an immediate solution. Otherwise, small software businesses will start going out of business.
Wow. So let's maybe go ahead and pivot to what founders, owners of software companies can do. What would you recommend? If you're a US-based company that's going to be affected by this, how should you best take action?
Yes. So if you are a US-based founder, which is to say citizen or resident of the US with a US company, whether that is a side project or a larger one that has employees, you should go to ssballiance.org and sign the coalition letter. This letter is going to be delivered to Congress before tax day, so sign it before April 10th.
Okay.
Go there, sign the letter. All of you know me as an indie founder. You don't know this because I don't talk about it very much until now, that I started out working in DC. And so I am using every connection I've got to make this happen and to get this into the right hands and directly into Congress. People are very receptive. And again, there's people who've been working on this for 4 years now, and it hasn't gotten through. So we are hoping that by bringing small businesses into the conversation, we can not only help Congress understand that this is urgent, but also that this isn't just a big business issue, right? This is having very serious impact, and it's not just for software companies either. It's biotechs, it's manufacturing, small and large, and so. The thing that people can do that will make an impact is go to ssballiance.org and sign the coalition letter.
And then would you recommend they reach out to their representative as well?
Not at this point. Not at this point. Yeah, so we will be doing follow-ups as it is strategically helpful. Okay. So this kind of just depends on the situation in Congress and what's going on there. So there have already been indie founders who are in strategically important places that have been connected with Hill staff and had an opportunity to talk about how this is directly impacting their business, because members listen to people in their own districts or their own states. Sure. And I just connected a whole bunch of people this morning as well. And so if people go to the ssballiance.org and they sign the coalition letter, I also ask for your full address, which I use to match to your congressional district. It's a weird thing where it's like, I also built the software that tells you what people's congressional district is. So it's quite a exercise in dog fooding.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah. So yes. So then as, particular areas are helpful, I'm reaching out to people individually. If you call your congressperson or you use their contact form, that is helpful. Their staff is required to keep tabs on every person who calls in or writes in about every issue. So that is helpful, but if we get to the point, if you go through the form, then I can also connect you with staff as it's helpful.
Perfect. Okay, that's awesome. First of all, thank you so much for doing all this work. I mean, you're not getting paid for this. You are obviously incentivized like the rest of us in terms of having this kind of a business that's going to be affected, but it's awesome that you stepped up and did this work. So really, really appreciate that. So I think maybe let's take another turn here and say, what can founders still do from there? Right. Okay. So they've done this. They've gone to the SSB Alliance. They've signed it. They are standing ready and waiting to call at whenever the moment arrives. They've done their duty to sort of try and nudge Congress in the right direction. Let's take two parts. First is like what can you do in your business? What would you do? What are you doing in your business? Maybe Arvid, I'd be curious what you think, like hypothetically as well, because I don't think you have a US-based business, but let's just say you have a US-based SaaS business. How would you be thinking about? Oh, you do have one. That's great. That's great.
My little, yeah, but it's not that effective because it's I run it by myself and it's not that profitable, so no problem for me. But it's still an issue that I'm concerned with. One of the things that blows my mind about this, two things. First off, the fact that indie founders now have to deal with US law, like the fact that we need to impact legislation as people who are way too busy to impact anything but their own business and the market that they're trying to serve. It's crazy. Like we don't have a legal department in our businesses, right? We don't have a public relations department or anybody who could deal with these things while we build our business. It's now deal with the tax stuff or deal with the business. Both is probably problematic or overwhelming for people. And the other thing is the only bank that could have helped us with this, or US-based founders, just exploded 2 weeks ago. So that's a problem. Like it seems to be this perfect storm of things that are surprising to people, even though now in retrospect, we look at it and we think, well, we should have done something about this much earlier, right? It feels like it's all coming at us at incredible speed out of nowhere. And that blows my mind. And the fact that now we have to deal with this as founders, that is bad. Now, answering your question, honestly, like going into this recession, I've been thinking a lot about like building a war chest. I did not think about building a war chest to be able to pay taxes that I don't need to pay. Like it feels like one of these things where a bootstrap business is in its leanness and in its agility can usually use its revenue, its earnings that it has, possible earnings that go beyond just paying for your expenses to invest in itself. It turns out that investing in yourself now includes putting money aside for these unforeseen circumstances. So in my own business, which is a Canadian media business, I am now saving money, not knowing that, it's not the same situation and it's probably not going to happen here in Canada, but I'm now thinking about I need at least a tiny little war chest in case there is a 5x tax burden on me in the future, which is unfortunate because that is money that could be spent on many other things that are not just hoping that other people are less incompetent. That's kind of what this is about for me. Like tax law should be handled in a competent way, which it hasn't been, and that's a problem. But yeah, war chest, that's what it is. Like going into any kind of economic downturn, usually you need some kind of financial liquidity. And it turns out bootstrap businesses are now at a slight disadvantage compared to VC funded businesses that have, or I don't know, I mean, fortunately still have after the explosion of SVB, some kind of money that enables them to pay for this. Yeah, I would like to hear what Michelle, what you're doing in your business to deal with this, because this sounds like a terrible threat, really, to the existence of a SaaS business.
Yeah, and before I get into that, I want to note that this likely impacts businesses even if you aren't profitable on a normal accounting basis, because unless that business is just sitting there and you only occasionally fix a bug or reply to a support question, but you don't add, like if you add any new features, if you were doing any improvements to it, all of that is R&E that is covered under 174. And so you could be losing money probably on a regular accounting basis and still owe taxes.
Yeah, even
because
a
it's
startup
artificially
like
inflating your it's artificially inflating your revenue.
Yeah, that's important to know. And maybe one thing before I throw this back at you, like if you are a founder that's not based in the United States at this moment and you're just waking up from the last 10 minutes of conversation that didn't really concern you, it's still important for you to take action and just talk to people about this who may not be aware of this. Because it's not just founders who may not be aware of this. From me following, Michelle, your podcast and everything you've been talking about, it's also accountants that are occasionally not aware of this change in the States. So if you are a founder that knows founders in the States, reach out to them, tell them about this. Hopefully they know about this already and have dealt with this, or ask their accountant what's going on. But there's a lack of awareness on many levels here, and we should do our best, even if we're not directly affected, to help our community. Because it's what you said, we're not lawyers, we're not accountants, this is not legal advice, but we're founders who want to help our founders succeed in our peer group, right? We want them to not be bankrupt. So it's now on us to help spread the word, really. And I'm glad you're on the show and talking about this, even though this is boring taxes. Well, it's life-threatening boring taxes, right? This is something, it's getting me worked up. That's usually happening.
Maybe we should get calmer then.
Let's talk about how you stay calm. That's a wonderful segue.
I want to note that there are a lot of founders who don't live in the U.S. but have U.S. LLCs, have U.S. C Corps, and unfortunately, you're not U.S. citizens or U.S. residents. You don't have the ability to petition Congress for a redress of grievances. But I know you're there, and I'm thinking of you, and I know that we are fighting for ourselves and for you as well. But I recognize that there are a lot of people who are paying a much higher tax bill in not their home currency, so probably also paying exchange fees in the course of that, who are impacted and don't really have any recourse except for spreading the word. And that is incredibly powerful because trying to drive 1,000 signatures on this. And so that is very helpful. In terms of staying calm, sorry, go ahead.
Actually, like, just one practical question I want to see what y'all think about this. I mean, how would you evaluate? I don't think we want to give anyone advice on this topic, because now the topic I'm about to bring up, because we're now also combining tax and legal, as well as sort of business and maybe debt considerations. But
sounds dangerous.
How would you think through yourself? It seems to me like, as things go, the likelihood of this getting resolved on a 1 to 2 year time horizon seems pretty good, right? You've got bills in Congress, you've got bipartisan support, you've got big companies and small companies all aligned on the same page. You have, alliances really working on this. It seems to me like, I would say, probably this gets resolved on some longer time horizon. And the main question is, does it get resolved fast enough? How would you think through the question of, let's say I need to take out a loan or loan the company some money or even raise some capital? I'm thinking about this right now. Should we be creating some sort of product for these companies to raise some sort of short-term 1 year capital or something to plug that gap on the basis that probably in the next 1 to 2 years, you're going to get it reversed and you'll get a big tax refund, and you just need to bridge that gap? How would you think through making that bet as a founder? If you didn't have the cash on hand, if you didn't already have the war chest to just cut the check and be mad about it, like you actually had to come up with the money somehow or go out of business.
I think that's a very personal decision for people, especially those who are in that position of receiving the higher tax bill. Again, I haven't gotten mine yet. Like, I actually need to send my email an accountant this week about it. And it's creating great uncertainty for me. And I know that we run our business quite conservatively. And so I am hopeful that we will be able to stomach that for this year. People who have been running leaner operations, which is most small businesses, are in a state of panic. And I think I guess I first have to say that it's difficult to put myself in that mindset, right, of someone who is fighting for their life, from my position. I think also that, the economic environment we are in, access to capital is difficult for most companies right now. Arvid mentioned SVB, right? I mean, like, there's so many founders who that was the only bank that would give them a mortgage, right? I mean, it's hard enough to get banks to work with small software businesses and small software founders during normal economic times. And so if there are people who have capital and that is an investment decision that they are able to make, I think they should explore whether that makes sense for them, is something they could pull off. It's a very different kind of hedge to be sort of betting on congressional action. It's putting founders in a very difficult position, right? It's do I use a home equity line of credit? Do I use my credit card? Like, how long is this going to take? How long do I eat the interest from this, right? And will I get it back from the IRS with interest as well? It's creating some very, very difficult decisions for people.
Cool. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, I think this has sparked a very interesting thought for me, which it hadn't occurred until we started talking, that this might be something that I can potentially help with our fund.
Maybe.
So
yeah.
I'm gonna pull that thread maybe on Twitter and see if there's a couple folks who would be interested to explore it, because, I mean, at the end of the day, you're talking about fundamentally sound businesses, right, that are going to take a short-term, massive cash flow hit, right? It's a liquidity crisis, just like all the other ones we've been dealing with, right? Where fundamentally operationally good businesses might need to come up with cash they don't have on a short-term basis. And, there are levers you can pull. Yeah. Right? There are levers
like
you
the
can
government
pull
was like, these are sound businesses. They just need,
right.
This is going to be a crisis for 3 months.
Yeah.
And we just need to fund them. The restaurants, like, they can survive, if we just pay them for 3 months, right? It's a little bit similar, right? These are otherwise sound businesses that only because of some I'm struggling to describe it without swearing, quite frankly, situation, businesses, are in this difficult position.
Okay, I'm gonna step right up to the line here and give some advice on how to interact with your accountant, which is not the same as actual tax advice. But something I think is really valuable. I remember I heard, I think Nick Huber made this point really eloquently, which is that your accountant is not a traffic cop enforcing the IRS rules on you, although a lot of them act that way. A lot of them basically take the rules and they try to put onto you, here is exactly what you have to do. If they come to you and they say, this is exactly what you have to do, and you're like, well, that's going to put me out of business, right? Make sure that you take a moment to turn it back around to them and say, what can we do? Explain to me, what are the legal and totally acceptable, but what options do we actually have? Can we file for an extension, right? That would at least give me another 6 months of breathing room or something like that. Just make sure that you don't because I think a lot of people have this relationship where, it kind of feels like their accountant works for the IRS and is there just telling them what to do, and remind them that they work for you. And so of course you don't want to override them. You do want to follow the rules, but have that last layer of conversation to say, this is a really big deal for me. What can you help me try to figure out if there's any options that apply to my specific situation? And make sure you have that last layer of conversation with them, because there may be some things, especially if we think there's at least some probability this gets fixed in the future, things that can just simply delay the actual cash needs for this, or that can parse it out over multiple years so you only have to pay a fraction. Again, this is not advice. I'm just saying, ask these questions, have this conversation with your accountant in that moment.
I mean, so it is.
You guys don't have to co-sign that. You can just let me dangle myself out there on that one.
So I want to agree with that. But first, it is my understanding that even if you do file an extension, which we have, you still owe the taxes in April. And so if you don't pay them, then you owe them plus penalties. And again, I think to your point is, you may make a calculated decision that is, I'm going to pay the penalties for this year. For what would my taxes have been this year? What are the penalties on top of it? This is not tax advice, but there are options, right? And asking your accountant to lay out all of your options, and asking them to think outside the box, and you were allowed to do that. Somebody told me once, you are allowed to optimize your taxes. It is not against the law to optimize your taxes.
Totally.
You cannot evade taxes. You can't change your software developer's title to, I don't know, like window cleaner, and then just expect it to not have any tax issues. That's fraud. I'm not a lawyer, but that's fraud. So, but it is not against the law to optimize your tax situation and work with your accountant to optimize your tax situation. The difficult thing for businesses now is that 2022 has already ended. And so if there were optimizations that you could have done, there aren't going to be as many options, but like the IRS has payment plans. There are options, right? And I think, in terms of getting into steps that people can do as they're looking at this, I think that's the first one, is have a conversation with your accountant and work through all of the options with them. From what it looks like to me, it's very clear that every company that has these R&E expenses, the software development expenses, chiefly among them for folks like us, that there will be a higher tax bill than that we had anticipated. And so as I thought about this going into this year, I mean, notwithstanding my own other personal tax hairballs that I'm sorting out, the first thing was, okay, what are the plans we have for the year and how can we scale those back, right? Like, we went into this year seeing that a bunch of big tech companies were laying people off, and we were like, hey, you know what? We're super busy. Maybe this is a good time for us to hire another engineer. Like, a lot of good people have just been laid off, people we know. That conversation is gone, right? During normal years, if a friend of ours is holding a conference and they ask us to sponsor, usually I say yes. Brand marketing like that is not happening this year. And so that's the first thing, is just kind of looking at plans and looking at what are the most obvious places to cut. The second one is the more sort of really looking at places to cut, right? Which is a common thing that you do going into a recession. So for us, we pulled back on all non-core spending, which, I mean, unfortunately for us, meant we're not participating in Calm Fund 4, and we've been participating in the other funds, but this, we just can't. It also means we are, pouring through all the services we're using, and we were paying Datadog $1,000 a month, even though we had planned to get rid of it 6 months ago. And it was like, all right, that is getting ripped out right now. That bill is no longer happening, right? And so just going through line by line, what are all of the things we spent money on this last year? We don't have a formal budget. I just kind of know all this in my head, which is probably not the calmest way to run it. But while you're sending your accountant all of your information for last year and figuring what you owe in taxes, that's a really good time to look through all of those expenses and be like, did we really need to be spending money on this? Do I know what this is? Is this a core expense? Is this a cost of goods sold expense? Do we have to pay this in order to provide our software? Or is this something that we can cancel? Can we use something cheaper? Is this and just kind of really taking a rough look through your budget. But again, I mean, there's, I think there's, I don't want to downplay that sometimes budgeting advice when people are in a massive financial crisis can feel a little bit like telling people to stop eating avocado toast in order to save for a house, right? If you need $500,000, not paying $5 a day for toast is not gonna cut it, right? And so I don't want to downplay the seriousness that this is. And Arvid, to what you said earlier about having a war chest, I mean, like I mentioned in my book how I manage our customers like a portfolio, and that's how I prioritize what kind of marketing I'm doing, what kind of customers I'm talking to, what I'm pulling out of that is and looking at all of our customers and saying, okay, we've got 20% in real estate. This was a portfolio, that would be too much. Let's purposefully move into other sectors, right? Not necessarily we fire all of those customers. We love our real estate customers, but maybe having more in other sectors would be helpful, like a portfolio, right? And so for me personally, I have done a lot of work for years now to try to prepare for recession. And what I did not prepare for was boneheaded tax policy, that we get charged taxes on something that Congress doesn't even think they should be charging us taxes on. Like, just the level of insanity is mind-boggling. And I think for like, just the more you think about it, you know, the more, right, I'll calm down. Okay. You know, the more you think about it, the more frustrating it gets, which for me, I think, you know, I think you get to a certain point in the business, kind of as you were saying, Tyler, that you have to ask yourself, is this a problem I need to be worrying about? Is this a problem I need to be handling myself? Can I pay somebody to worry about this and take care of it for me? Right? And I feel like that was it's a very big stage for a lot of founders to go through. For most people, you have your accountant to worry about this for you. Maybe there are other people in the community that you know that you can bring in. Maybe you have a good relationship with a bank. Maybe Tyler pulls something together, right? Like, maybe you have options too. Maybe your accountant knows of some options, right? If you're having trouble paying this, you have them. And also you can sign the letter to Congress. And if there is more that you personally need to do on this, I will tell you. Otherwise, you can offload that to me. I'm taking this on as a side project until it's fixed. I'm in the weird position of being the indie founder that knows a bunch of people in DC and never thought those things would ever interact with one another. And we'll take it from there, right? But spending all of your time thinking about this and trying to parse out the legislative chess around it, like, it's not a productive use of your time. And even when I started thinking about doing this as a project, I was like, do I really need to be the person doing this, right? Like, it's like having arguments on the internet. Do I need to be a person in this argument? Do I have to be, like, am I specifically, uniquely the person who has to make this argument? Or can I go on?
Sometimes the answer is yes. Yeah.
I guess you are.
Sometimes the answer is yes, which is what I was kind of like, well, I guess I do have to do it. But I'm doing it so you don't have to.
Yeah, that's perfect. Exactly. I think I would sort of put a bow on that part as, like, you know, if you zoom back out, man, I really feel for founders right now. And I mean, I'm including myself in that moment as well, because, like, there's just one thing after another. And, you know, whether it's, you know, it's COVID, and then it's interest rates, and then it's SVB explosions, and then it's crypto busts. And then, you know, it's just, there's always some crazy thing going on that feels like it's throwing kind of radioactive waste in your path. And I think it's important to remember that, like, this is kind of now part of the game, right, of being an entrepreneur, is like, you can sort of, you know, like, unless you're going to step up and take action like you have, your options are sort of like wail about it and lose sleep, or just like take action, right? And building mental and business resiliency to these sorts of things now just feels like that's necessary. That's a piece of it, alongside, you know, the risk of, you know, that you take as, like, just fundamentally being an entrepreneur, right? Of not having a steady paycheck and not having a pension or a 401k, like all of those risks that you already took on. This is another one now that you have to build that toolkit for dealing with these sorts of things. And I think, like, you really hit on the one that I've been preaching a lot, which is to really focus on what's in your control and what's not. Right. And with a lot of these external things, actually, like, the vast majority of it is out of your control. You know, at the end of the day, like, it sucks. not trying to minimize how annoying it would be to have your business completely nuked by some random change in the tax code. That would be devastating for people. But a huge percentage of whether or not that happens is out of your control, right? You can do your thing. You can sign the petition, you can call your representative, and then all you can really do is get back to focusing on your business, right? And so really just continuously reminding myself, like, focus on what piece of this is in my control, which could be, how can I, create some plan Bs, right? How can I line up financing? How can I maybe factor my invoices? How can I, make a plan for if I have to lay off staff really fast? How can we pull forward revenue with switching people to annual plans, right? There's a long list of things that's in your control. And then there's a much, much, much bigger list of things that are completely out of your control. And so really just like zeroing in on the difference between those two, I think, is one really important way to to stay calm through this sort of thing. So,
one thing that really stands out to me here is that big old list you just rattled down, like with all the things you could do, like many of which any given founder probably only would think about 50% of. Right. One thing that really stands out to me is what we're currently doing is, like, we're building community awareness around the topic and around potential solutions to that topic. So if there's one thing that a founder could do, is go into their founder community, into their entrepreneurial peer group, and talk to people about this. It's not just on you to solve your own problem at this point. These things are so potentially disastrous that you probably should talk to your peers and figure out what they are doing. Like front loading revenue, that's something that I hadn't thought about just until this point. Like, I could send out an email to my permanent link customers if I had this problem. I don't really, because war chest, right? But if I needed to, I could say, well, get the yearly plan. There's a little bookkeeping issue around, like, for all SaaS businesses. You can support this if you want by getting, I don't know, like, get it for 80%, 75% of the price, whatever you do for your annual plans. That would keep my business afloat until this is resolved. This is something you could do. But, like, you told me this 30 seconds ago. Before that, I wouldn't have thought about this. And only because I'm in this kind of communicative communion with you do I know about it. So if you go to your community, listen to what your peers, your other founders are doing and trying to figure out, that is something that you can do that is actually actionable for your own business. And I really like that. I mean, that's what our community is here for, helping each other on this. And that also puts you back into the kind of into agency. Now you can do something that will give you more awareness and knowledge about, the actions you can take. And it's still urgent, but there's less self-doubt, less anxiety, this is important at this point to separate the urgency from the anxiety and from the fear that we have of not making it, and the potential fear of bankruptcy and all that. That is still possible, but it won't help you to be afraid of this. What helps you is to focus on the things that you can do. And if this is also a very calm approach, right? To try to stay calm on an emotional level, but not complacent. These are two very distinct topics, right? Two very distinct things. You still need to take immediate action, but it shouldn't be focused on panic. It should be focused on being focused. So, that's what I would suggest, is like, find your community, talk to people right now today about what they are doing, and then try to implement these things in your business as well.
And I mean, to that, right? Getting to that headspace where you are able to calmly look at all of your options, to remember that you have options, is so important, right? I mean, when you get a surprisingly high bill from a tax authority, which, I mean, I was just telling an accountant a couple of weeks ago on a very different issue that's a kind of emotional trauma I like to minimize in my life. It's natural, right, to feel panic about that, right? And I think it's okay to feel that. And then the next thing that we have to do in order to move into that calmer headspace is to remember that our own bodies need to feel safe as well. And this is a really key thing for it, that if you have a meditation practice, if you run, if you do anything that physically makes you feel okay in your own body, that is very, very powerful for finding a sense of calm during a time when you may not initially feel or remember that there are things you have control over, and that there are ways that you have options. And so prioritizing those things for you, whatever they are, giving yourself that space to come down from the immediate cortisol overload of stress, and find a way to just sort of bring the temperature down just a little bit, right? I'm not going to tell you to breathe, because if you tell people who are panicking to breathe, they will panic even more.
Yeah.
But well, to literally calm down your body first. And then remember, you have options. You can outsource this problem, right, to your community, to people you pay to solve this problem for you. You have options. You have gotten to this point because you are a smart and capable person who is able to recognize that they have options and can solve problems. You have probably solved harder problems before in your life and in your business, and you will solve this one.
Amen. I want to clip that and just listen to it every morning, actually.
That would be a great little affirmation.
Next audiobook, just affirmations for entrepreneurs.
Well, it is important, right?
Hard things.
It is. It's a central important thing for our own mental health to stay aware of our capacity to find mindfulness. And like Tyler and I, we're trying to build the Calm MBA, right? We're trying to build something that teaches people the approach to building a calm business. And I have this feeling that we should put a mindfulness chapter somewhere into the process, like not just meditation, but also just being aware that you are capable of solving problems and maybe doing affirmations. I mean, it may sound funny to talk to yourself in the mirror, but it has a psychological effect. And in a moment where everything around you is like on fire, maybe taking a minute to calm yourself down is actually an executive business decision that you should be making, right? It's not just a personal thing. It will impact your business. So I guess we are now at the point where we can talk a little bit about the Calm MBA, which is the whole reason that we started this podcast, to give people the opportunity to follow along as we build the thing that will teach them to stay calm when things are exploding, and to be calm in all other situations, which apparently are few and rare in nature. But we've been recently discussing how we should structure this, because we want to get this out as soon as possible. Obviously, the time is now, right? It's like we need to give people the potential tools for building these businesses as soon as possible, so they don't run into these explosive situations. So, Tyler, would you like to just discuss a little bit what we've come up with here? And I would like to hear Michelle's opinion on this too, being a person who is very calm and building a extremely calm business. You know, it's kind of nice to have somebody on that would be both a great person to help us with the project and just a voice, another opinion giver outside of it.
For sure. Yeah. So, Michelle, just to briefly recap, in case you're not 100% up to speed on this, we have this code name, Calm MBA project we're working on. The basic premise is to get some of the principles of building a calm company and developing yourself as a calm founder to folks a little earlier on in the life cycle of entrepreneurship, right? So at the time where they're being bombarded with, all of the stories of how to build a rocket ship and go raise venture capital and go to the accelerator, there's actually something else that they can start to see as a real path that they could sort of follow. And I think we have a really good sense of the general principles and things that should go in there. The big question has been trying to figure out how to really put that into a package that makes sense and that isn't trying to completely boil the ocean, right? So the scope makes sense and the product makes sense and we can actually do it. We had originally kind of landed on the idea that the first product should be more of a self-paced course covering a variety of topics, targeting very early stage folks. And so we usually do shout outs at the end, but I will just shout out Kelly Wild Miller, who is an entrepreneur who posted about instead of doing a multi-week long course, breaking the topic up into a series of short workshops, like 2, 3, 5-day workshops that would be intensive and you could iterate on. So Arvid and I were talking about that this week, about whether or not we should potentially start there as a starting point, which would be, I guess the idea would be a sort of, let's say, plus or minus 3-day workshop, remote friendly, and really, I think I would think of it as like folks at the starting line, right? So real like workshopping ideas, trying to think about what is a Calm company and how that maps to their vision of building a company. Initial reactions to what that would be as a product, especially I want you to filter all of this stuff through the lens of the whole process you just went through with Deploy Empathy, right? In terms of trying to get some really cool principles into the brains of a similar audience. What is your gut reaction to starting there, or just any reactions to that so far?
So my first reaction is that I love the idea of it.
That's great.
So 3 years into my business, I did not feel like I was competent enough to be running the business I already had, and I went out and got an MBA. Because that just
forgot about that. Yeah,
felt like the only option to do, right? And so I love that idea of making that more accessible. I mean, I went to a state school, so it wasn't expensive, but it was still like $35,000, and not everybody is in the position to pay that, especially when you are at the beginning of building a business, or has a university nearby that offers business courses. And I think for me, quite frankly, I describe myself as being in a hibernation period before I took on all of this tax stuff, and I was just dealing with Geocodio things and whatnot. And I felt like I was in this time where the kind of sort of bootstrapper education I had sort of done everything that I had talked about, but then the MBA, like, a lot of it doesn't kick in until 10, 20, 50 million in revenue, right? And so kind of in this weird in-between state, and thinking a lot about how we as entrepreneurs can like keep learning. And as I started talking to people about this, one thing that came back, and one thing that I loved in my MBA, was learning from other people. And so I love that you're thinking about it as a workshop, because I think a lot of people, whether it was, a prestige Ivy MBA or, sort of a more local one like mine, right? Like, or a Calm MBA, is that the people you meet are a huge part of the experience. And I think that is learning from other people and their experiences, or even just what they're thinking about, right, is so important. And it's also so energizing to be around people who are passionate about the things that you are passionate about, but they're passionate in like slightly different ways. I mean, this was my favorite part of college, right? Like, was you're just all of a sudden around all these people who are interested in something similar as you, when in your daily life you don't really have anyone who is, right? And so that is so motivating and inspiring, and success creating on its own. And I think that kind of cohorting people in this, and having it be workshops is, I think that's totally the right way to go about it. I think with people, I think there's kind of a challenge in serving people who don't already have a business, because they maybe don't have the money to go somewhere to do it, right? And then it's like, well, you could do it remote, and then how do you make sure that they're still getting those connections in that environment? And I mean, we've just kind of had 3 years where basically everything was remote, so I haven't figured it out, but I'm sure like a lot of people have spent a lot of time trying this and testing it and figuring it out, and like there's people you could talk to who could tell you how to do this, right?
Totally.
I think a 1-day Saturday workshop, though, is what I would do, because if you're thinking that people are working full time,
that's true.
Unless like,
sure,
it's unlikely that they would be able to do it. And there's a lot of executive MBA programs that are meant for people who are working full time, and usually those are like half day Friday, all day Saturday, once a month, or every like 2 weeks kind of a program, but oftentimes once a month. And I think it's worth looking at how they structure it. They usually structure it as being in person. Well, I guess before COVID I'm talking about.
Sure. But
I would encourage you to go that direction of like one Saturday a month. Here's like, and we're going to do these like 2 modules, and like, this is what we're doing, and you're expected to be active on Slack, during the week and during other times. And like, whatnot, like, I don't know. There's all tons of things you could do, right? You're expected to have a random coffee chat with at least one person once a week for an hour, right? And like, if you don't have anything to talk about, here's your topic or something. But I think baking community into it from the very beginning, and learning from other people is a huge part of the value of any education program.
Wow. That is extremely helpful. Thank you so much for that. Like, I had considered that we were likely going to be serving people who already have a job and would have to do this like in the evening or something, but like pushing that onto the Saturdays and then giving people time during the week to fit whatever they need to do in there. That is a very good idea. Thank you so much, Michelle. You're awesome. Did you know? You know how great you are? That is extremely helpful, because we want this to be something actionable, right? We want to get people to actually do something and get over whatever finish line there might be, right? That depends on how much we can offer. And that's kind of where this whole question comes from. It's a question of scope. Like, who are we talking to and how far do we take them with this? Because it could be the whole journey. We could like do the whole thing where it's like an accelerator plus some kind of alumni network or whatever. But we're trying to be as impactful as possible without being overboarding, right, Tyler? Is that right?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I like that a lot. Man, this is just, there's so many ways you can go with this. What is, Michelle, what is your gut instinct on like a pricing structure for something like this that included virtual community, it was remote, and it was, either one day or, pick whatever kind of feels right? Obviously, if it's 1 day a month for a year, that's a different price than 1 day a month once. But like, pick a number out of a hat. Like what is your like first reaction to how this should be priced?
My gut reaction is that look at the competition and how they price it, and generally that's at least a semester commitment at a time.
Okay.
I might encourage you to, so however long the program is, whether that's 6 months or a year, right? I would encourage an upfront commitment from the very beginning. And so whether that's $2,000, $5,000, like, this is an upfront commitment that people are making. Now, of course, they'll need an ability to try it at some point. I mean, pricing plans and all that kind of stuff, right? But like, I don't think it should be something that you can kind of turn on and off from a given month, right? It should be expected that like you're joining this, for example, you're joining this cohort. This is your group. Like, all of these people have committed to being here for the next 6 months. You're committing to being here for the next 6 months, and having to make a financial commitment is I think part of how people incentivize themselves to keep showing up.
I like that a lot.
I mean, with everything, right? Like, this is your business. You know more about it than I do. You're going to learn more about it than I do. And so, like, take that with a grain of salt, right? Like,
I like it.
I'm not an expert in building education businesses. So
totally. Yeah, no, we're just like, it's just, this is all just, like sort of calibrating. It's kind of like the reason we started this is it's a very, very tricky, interesting productization problem. Like, the actual content is not actually the problem. We've both written about it enough that like we know what we want to get into people's brains. It's just, it is kind of tricky to figure out how to go about that. So that's what we're sort of continuously playing with that in public. So this is great. Love it.
Yeah, thanks so much for being part of this discussion and our exploration of the topic in public as well. That is really, really helpful.
What do y'all think? Should we wrap it up here? We've gone over.
It's time to get back to entrepreneurial activism and get people excited to sign things and talk to people about it, right? I think like you already had your shout out, Tyler. Michelle, do you want to shout out anybody who's been helpful, supportive with your whole Section 174 situation, or anybody else? Would you like to shout out anybody else? That's up to you as well.
There have been so many founders who have jumped on board and been so open with their time and the struggle that they're going through about Section 174. I mean, if I started to list them, I would forget someone, so I am not going to do that. I will say, on the point of finding a sense of calm to the point where you can start to make decisions from a physical sense. Angela Parker, you probably remember her from Mexico City. Angela is a fantastic person. She's a coach, and you guys should have her on. But if people are really finding themselves struggling with that, she really understands the somatic and physical side of finding calmness, and is totally someone you should talk to.
Yeah, on Twitter, she's Angela Parker FIT. Just that's how it's spelled. Yeah, awesome. Yeah,
Angela's have a fitness business, I think so. Yeah,
I think so. Cool. Yeah.
And
shout out ssballiance.org.com. Which one?
.org. ssballiance.org. Small Software Business Alliance. It's not actually like an organization. I just needed a domain name, and that sounded great. It's me.
Okay.
And I'm liaising with DC to hopefully get this fixed. And so ssballiance.org. If you're a U.S. founder with a U.S. company, sign the letter. It is going to go directly to Congress, and it is the most impactful thing you can do, even if you're only at the point right now where you're feeling unsure about what the impacts of 174 will be. That is helpful because it's causing uncertainty in your business. So go there and sign it, and thank you.
Yes. And even if you're not affected, talk to people, encourage them to do something about it. This is a community effort to protect our founder community from bankruptcy and upheaval of lives. Like, this is the least you can do is to share this so that others who are maybe not aware of it become aware of it and can do something about it. So thank you so much, Michelle, for being on. That was extremely nice, as it is usually to talk to you, but it's also very urgent and timely, and I'm glad that we had the opportunity to hear you explain this and share your incredibly important and most welcome activism on this subject. So thanks so much for being on. That was really nice.
Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate you spreading awareness of this. It just feels like an existential threat to our way of business life, and I really appreciate it.
All right, well, let's do something about it, and then catch up again next week. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and see you next week.